Am I really not allowed to have non-Christian friends? Because I know the Bible says I'm an enemy of God if I haven't confessed my faith, but I also know that Jesus sat with sinners. So where's the middle ground? Well, if you're also wondering this question, just as I have been, I got you, girl. Hey guys, my name is Dami. If you're new here, then welcome. I'm a faith-based content creator with a passion for helping all my girlies, all the college students, and of course, all my believers just grow in our walk with the Lord. I am super excited for today's topic because y'all, like I said, I have been struggling with this. I've been really seeking wisdom on how to navigate this struggle in my own life and, how I'm supposed to go about my friendships, especially since I feel like I'm in an area in my life where a lot of my friendships are like crumbling, like friendships from my past and things that I thought like would last forever just crumbling right before my eyes. And y'all, it hurts. It really does suck to see like friends that like I thought I would be friends with for forever. I mean, we talked about the kids, we talked about the careers and stuff, and paths are just like dividing. We're going our separate ways. But above all, God is just redirecting my entire life. But yeah, we're here. We are here talking about this because I know there's a lot of other people struggling and they're just seeking wisdom on, are we even allowed to have like non-godly friends, or is that even something worth investing in? If you have recently made friends with somebody and they're not necessarily as deep in their religion or as serious about the faith or even a Christian at all, but you see potential with them, like how are you supposed to go about that? So yeah, to just be a little bit more transparent on like how I've struggled with this. I've had a lot of Muslim friends in the past and a lot of like Muslim best friends, to be more specifically. I have Muslim family as well, of course. And I've also like been in a lot of secular spaces and made friendships that way too. Like I go to a very secular school, I work or whatever. So yeah, I'm making friends or like I'm interacting with people, as I'm sure like you are too. Okay. Not all of us are pastors out here and, only get to be around primarily Christians all the time. Most of the time we're interacting with non-believers and in the world, being in the world. But yeah, let's go ahead and start off by defining what a friend is. Like, what are we even talking about? Let's get clear with what we're even asking. So according to dictionary.com, a friend is defined as a person attached to another by feelings of affection or personal regard, is on good terms with one another. That is how it's officially defined. So like I said, let's get clear with the question. So we're asking, are we allowed as Christians to have feelings of affection, and not in a sexual way, just like, you like this person or whatever. Are we allowed to have affection towards someone else, or like, can we be attached to someone else who may not be a Christian? That's $1 million question, right? Well, when we frame it that way, yes, of course, I think it's permissible as Christians to be on good terms with other people, regardless of faith, because we know like we are commanded, or like the fruits of the spirits are love, joy, peace, gentleness and self-control. But yeah, love is the one I want to emphasize there, kindness as well. But for me, there just still seems something wrong with that. Like I still feel some sort of conviction, like, God, are you really calling me to be friends with people based on this definition? Because there just still seems like there's something wrong with that picture. There still seems like there's something missing. And in situations like that, a good rule of thumb is asking the simple question that I'm sure like we've all heard in Sunday school or like heard growing up. What would Jesus do? Or like, what did Jesus do, during his time here on earth? Because, as Christians, our goal or the objective is to emulate Christ, is to be Christ-like and to live a life as close to, the life that he lived. So when you look at it that way, like, what would Jesus do to go about this? There is a definite answer. And that answer is simply the phrase, there's levels to this, okay? So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that there should be certain levels of intimacy, and that's that key word, intimacy, that you allow yourself to experience depending on the context or depending on the person. So I'm going to give you 5 easy ways to understand this using Jesus, using the life of Jesus and the life that he lived while he was here on earth. So first, let me go ahead and share with you what these 5 levels even are. So we know that Jesus came for all, he sat with sinners, he took up 12, he confided in 3, and he submitted to 1. Okay, so that is what those 5 levels of intimacy are. So we know that Jesus came for all, right? We know that his objective was to die for our sins and give us a way back to the Father, give us salvation and a way back to heaven with God. A really good verse that helps us understand this even more is Mark 8:34, when Jesus is calling out to a crowd and he says, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. The part in this verse that I really want to emphasize is when Jesus says, if anyone. And what he is doing when he says this, he is acknowledging free will, but he's also making himself approachable, in the sense that he is not secluding himself off or just only allowing a certain group of people access to him. He is making it so that he himself is approachable. If anyone wants to, do what they need to do or do what they got to do to get salvation, they can do so. And what that has to do with us as Christians, of course, we are not Jesus. People are not supposed to be coming to us for salvation, but we are emulators of Christ, right? So it's important to really be intentional with making sure that we're making ourselves approachable at all times, with making sure that people can have access to us. People aren't afraid to come up to us because we may be mean or we may be gossipy or we may have a mean girl reputation or anything, but we are making it so that we can be approachable. Y'all, this convicted me so bad because I got a mean stink face on me, okay? Like when I'm just like chilling, I'm not really doing too much, or I'm just like in my own world, I can have a mean face. But what I didn't realize is that may send the wrong vibe to some people sometimes. I've had a lot of people in my past tell me that, yeah, I thought you were so mean when I first met you because, you just look so serious. And I'm like, no, like I'm actually one of the sweetest people, or like I think I am, but sometimes I don't see what I look like when, I'm sitting down by myself or I'm chilling. So God really had to convict me and bring my awareness to the fact that my face, like my facial expressions, don't make me approachable sometimes, or my reputation. When I used to be because I'll admit it, I used to be very gossipy. I used to be a mean girl. That was not making me very approachable. People would be, scared to talk to me. They wouldn't feel comfortable or inclined to talk to me. And as a believer, that should not be how I am. When God is obviously showing us the representation of how Jesus was, he made himself approachable. He allowed anyone access to him, not just, secluded few, not just the elites, or in my case, not just my friends or my sisters or whatever the case may be. But yeah, approachability is so important, just in your walk and just as a believer yourself. So moving on to that second portion, or that second level, which is the fact that Jesus sat with sinners. The verse I really wanted to emphasize was the Lord's Supper, which was Mark 14, when God is literally sitting with the 12 of his disciples, and understanding each of their backgrounds, understanding each of their stories helps you really see that God didn't sit with the elites. He didn't come for, the people who had prestige or who had recognition. He sat with sinners, y'all. I mean, Matthew, who was a Jewish tax collector, or even knowing, Mary Magdalene's story, or even worse, like Judas. Jesus is literally sitting down at the table breaking bread with the man who's going to betray him, who's going to sell him out for a couple pieces of silver. He's literally sitting at the table with him. But what I also want to point out is the fact that Jesus didn't sit with the prestige. He didn't sit with the elites or, the people of that day that would have known the most religious text, because that would defeat his purpose. First of all, it was definitely a humility thing, his ability to depict and show us what perfect humbleness looks like when he placed himself in an environment knowing he is a son of God. I mean, he came to earth as the son of God. That is who he is. And he sat with the poor. He sat with the people who didn't have all this wealth, this prestige, this recognition, things that we've placed, earthly emphasis on. I'm not even gonna try to say that again, but, that are ultimately not going anywhere in the long run. So humbleness and humility were definitely one of his priorities. But he also sat with sinners, with non-believers, to plant seeds, because that was his purpose as the Lamb of God. He didn't sit with the people who would have known religious texts the most, like the Pharisees or the Sanhedrin, but he sat with non-believers to share the gospel where it was needed the most. So how is that relevant to our life and our walk as Christians? Well, this is a clear indicator that we do not need to be sitting with Christians all the time, okay? If Christians are the only people we are surrounding ourselves around, then we are failing at our number one job, our number one purpose, which is to be fishers of men. And how can you be a fisher of men if you were constantly in a group of, other fishers themselves? You need to be really intentional with placing yourself in environments where, you can share the gospel. And if not, share the gospel, then show what a Christ-centered life looks like. Show what God's power can do, because you never know who you can impact by the words that you say, even if you're not preaching the gospel directly, but with your actions, with your words, with your kindness. You never know how you can plant a seed in someone's life. And if you're not placing yourself in those environments, if you're surrounding yourself by like only Christians, then you're not having that opportunity to fulfill your purpose, to be a fisher of men. This is definitely something God has to check me on. And now, like, I'll ask myself, am I giving Sanhedrin energy today? Like, is my behavior giving Pharisee energy? intimacy. And what I mean is like, am I acting in a way that's othering, that's not being kind to people who may not believe the same things as me? And I'll be honest, that's definitely something that's difficult for me because not everyone's easy to deal with. Like, let's just be real. But when you really start to understand the fate of non-believers and where their destiny currently lies, it should make you show a little more humility. But yeah, I say all that to say to never forget that you always have an opportunity to plant a seed, and you won't be able to do that. You won't be able to fulfill your purpose and live out your purpose of being a fisher of men if you're only surrounding yourself by Christians and by believers. Just be extra cautious, of course, and discerning on what environments you should be exposing yourself to, but keep at the front of your mind that your ultimate objective as a Christian is to share the gospel. So that third level of intimacy is the fact that Jesus took up 12. So we obviously know that Jesus had 12 disciples, throughout his ministry, and this level of intimacy that he had with them was a lot deeper than he had, with the crowds that he would prophesy to. What's important to know is that he was fundamentally still the same person, he was still Jesus, but all that changed was, this added level of intimacy, this extra level of access that he allowed them to have. We saw this throughout their time traveling together, but we also saw this when Jesus would be speaking with crowds or speaking to crowds, but then he would sometimes have this extra element or this extra level of explanation, only reserved for his disciples. He was very strategic when, picking who his disciples were going to be and who those people were going to be that were following him all the time, that were going to be as close to him as they were. So in our lives, when we're determining like who that group of people is going to be, like who gets that extra access to us or who gets that extra element of vulnerability and intimacy with us, it's important to be really intentional with who we pick and really being intentional with why them, how are they going to help me fulfill my purpose? What role do each of these individuals play in my life, in my purpose? But above all, really asking God for discernment and wisdom. Like, okay, is this person meant to have this level of access to me? Are they meant to be this close? Or was this my will? Or was this an attack from the enemy or a distraction from the enemy? And sometimes when you ask that and you already have these intimate friendships, you may have to reevaluate boundaries and reset what those boundaries look like. But that's okay, so long as it's for the right reasons and it's for kingdom purposes. We know that all 12 of Jesus's disciples were sinners, but yet he still kept them around. So understanding that friendships aren't perfect, friends are not perfect, you are not perfect yourself. So giving people grace where it's needed and not just cutting off friends anytime they offend you, but also having discernment, enough discernment to know like who should even have that access to you to begin with. So even though he had the 12 disciples, there were so many occasions where Jesus only confided in 3 and had this extra element of intimacy with just 3. And those 3 were Peter, James, and John. So of course we saw this on several occasions, but we also saw that, he confided in them with high things, with the high points and with the low points. So one of the high points that, Jesus only allows these 3 to experience with him is when he was transfigured. So in Mark 9, it says, after the 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain by themselves to be alone. He was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became dazzling, extremely white as no launderer on earth could whiten them. So there were incredible things that he only allowed a select few, his 3, to experience, that extra element of intimacy. But we also know that he confided in them with his low points too. So in the garden, before he was betrayed by Judas, he took the disciples and told them to sit there, but then he separately took Peter, James, and John, and he told them to come with him while he prayed. In Mark 14, it says, he told his disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him and began to be deeply distressed and troubled. He said to them, I am deeply grieved to the point of death. So I'll be honest, I don't really know how Jesus went about selecting Peter, James, and John, but what we do know is that we serve a God of intention. So his reason for selecting only these 3, or specifically these 3, was extremely intentional. We can also take away and even realize that even within our most intimate groups, he had his 12, but he still chose 3. So even within our most intimate groups, we should still have a select group of individuals that we reveal certain things to, or that we have an extra element of intimacy with. There are certain things that are going to happen in our life that don't necessarily need to be shared with everybody. Oftentimes we end up confiding in people who should not have as much access to us as they probably do. And this happens when we were misplacing people in our lives, when we were giving people that level 4 intimacy when they really should be left at level 2. So it's really important to have discernment in who you're confiding in and who you're allowing to see the most intimate parts of yourself. Because as you can see, there can be some snakes even in your close circles. Judas was a snake, okay? And he still had this access to God. He was still one of his disciples. So yeah, definitely pray for discernment on, who needs to be having those mountain experiences with you or those valley experiences with you, because not everyone's intentions are pure. And remember, you don't need to be out here just confiding in everybody, okay? There are levels to this. So make sure you're placing people in their proper levels. And lastly, and most importantly, Jesus always submitted to the one. And we know this one was his Father in heaven. So we know that even with the 3, the 3 people he confided the most with on earth, he always spoke to God and kept the Father as his foundation. We saw it when, he was in the garden praying, when he was with the 12, he took took only 3, but he went far away or further away to only speak to God. So after telling the disciples that, he's greatly distressed to the point of death, he says he went a little further, fell to the ground and prayed that if it was possible that the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not that I will, but what you will. This is the part I always get wrong. Whenever I am in great distress, my first instinct is to always seek out comfort from someone who may be in my top 3 or maybe in my top 12, from someone who is tangible and on earth. But as we see in our moments of great distress, our instinct or our first resort should be to take it to God. And the reason for this is because there are certain things that we're going to deal with that are God-sized problems. And ultimately, that is the only person who can solve your problems. So above all, as Jesus shows us, our greatest resort, our firm foundation should be God. Okay, he is the person we should be the most intimate with and the person whose presence we should seek out daily, especially in those moments of despair. So now, with knowing all 5 of those levels of intimacy, I encourage you to really evaluate whether or not you have misplaced people or whether or not God really is that foundation and the person you were being the most intimate with. So it's okay if you have to redefine some of the boundaries in certain friendships or in certain relationships if it's for the right reasons, if it's for kingdom purposes. It might suck, it might not be fun, but if it is for the right reasons, then it will always be worth it. Comment down below which level of intimacy you are currently struggling with. And thank you for watching today's video. I'll see you later.